Hi there, wolves. It's good to be back with you. We've had some really nice weather lately and some intermittent rain that makes it more interesting. I was out in the field the other day walking along some water ruts where trucks have gone by and filled the area with water from rain, and it's been holding that, and so life has moved into those. And I wanted to share with you what all I found. Here you can see the two tire ruts, each with about an inch to 3 inches of water in them. And the left side rut was full of frogs. Well, not quite frogs, tadpoles, lots and lots of tadpoles. That was all I saw in it, and it was solid. As I'm going to show you in a minute, they were wiggling all over. Here you can see some of the action as I walk along the track. The tadpoles are all over the place. I would estimate over 1,000 in that 10-foot stretch. You'll see there's big fields where they're struggling, and then some patches where they're all squeezed together. I took some of the tadpoles and put them in the lid of a box so that you could see them swimming around, and you can see the little stubs at the end of their tail there where the legs will be. On closer inspection, it turned out that not all of these were frogs. The little ones that I'm going to show you with the uh, portrait on white is a toad. So the toad has a rounder body, and the frog has a more tapered body with a little tapered nose. And as you can see, it's very small. It was about the size of an eraser on your pencil. Do any of you remember what this guy is? That's right. It's a water strider. It runs across the water and grabs things. It's got, well, you remember the penny and the paper clips. It's water cohesion, how the molecules stick together. And the water strider has thousands of little hydrophobic hairs on it, means that they repel water. And so they can run across the water. He has to balance his feet. If he pushed too hard on one, he'd go through. He has middle legs he rows with, just like a set of oars. They're really cool. These are true bugs. That means instead of having chewing parts like a beetle, they have piercing and sucking mouth parts. And they eat the spiders and insects that fall into the water. So they're waiting always to jump on what hits the water. There are other critters that hunt along the surface of the water. Can you spot this one? I saw 3 different species of spiders. They would dance across the water in some cases, or in other cases, they'd be running along particles along the edge of the water. This one happens to be a fishing spider, Dolmetes species. It is a Dolmetes because we can see the eyes. When you see the eyes here, you'll notice that there are 4 eyes on top that are big and 4 eyes on the bottom that are kind of in a curve or a smile. A wolf spider looks very similar to this, except if for a wolf spider, the eyes are in a frown. They're curved downward. The fishing spider waits for ripples, and then it runs across the water to grab something's fallen in, a fly or some other insect. But they can go underwater to hunt. They have hydrophobic hairs again, but in their case, the hydrophobic hairs can hold air, so they can spend several minutes underwater absorbing air from under those hairs. Pretty cool. There were a lot of these little tiny flying things that looked almost like mosquitoes. I caught one on the surface of the water, and it's not a very good picture because it was moving pretty fast. But here's one I got in the bug box and cooled down. These are non-biting midges. Some of the midges will actually bite you, and these are not harmful at all for that. Uh, they have larvae that are long and skinny and have little jaws on the front. They're Some of them actually produce hemoglobin like ours and therefore are red. They're called bloodworms. The larva eats decaying and plant matter and little tiny algae. Here we've got a picture of a molted skin called an exuvia. This is where the larva has gotten to the next stage and crawled out of its skin to go into a new skin, just like a caterpillar does. They have feathery antenna. This is a challenge for you. You like photography. This is a friend of mine, John Rapp, and he is an amateur. He doesn't do this for a living, but that's one of the photographs that he took, and he has some really cool pictures that you can see. Another insect you'll see a lot flying around are mayflies. You may have seen these when you did the Bull Creek water macros. These are little tiny things. They have three tails on them, and the feathery things you see on the abdomen are the gills. The larvae molt 12 to 27 times, each time getting slightly bigger. The adults only live for 24 hours. They mate and they die. They don't even bother to have mouth parts. When I collected water in a bug box and looked in, there were these tiny little things going around, uh, flitting around. They were the size of the ball in a ballpoint pen, very tiny. These are predaceous diving beetles. The adult traps air under the wing covers and then swims down, hunts. They're vicious hunters. They rip and chew their prey, anything they catch. Most of the tiny ones are only going to be catching small insects, but larger ones may actually take on a tadpole or a fish. The hairs on the legs that you see here make them behave like paddles, and the legs stroke together like oars. The larva is a long, skinny thing with big fangs, and they suck out juices. So they inject their toxin, digest the body of their victim, and then suck them back up. I picked up one of these in a pond. It was a big one, and it bit my finger, and my finger was swelled up within a minute, and it didn't go down for about 5 minutes. Very painful, I can tell you. So I wouldn't mess with them again. With water scooped up in a bug box, I could see little tiny, barely visible red dots that were floating around, scurrying around frantically. These are red water mites. You may have seen the velvet mites that in the forest floor, but these are purely aquatic. They're arachnids like spiders and ticks, so they have 8 legs as adults. They have an incomplete metamorphosis, which I think you all remember. Yeah, I see you wiggling your hand there. Right. They have an incomplete metamorphosis. It means that they always look the same as they grow bigger. They don't go through a pupa stage. They just keep getting bigger, but the adults will then be able to reproduce. The young have 6 legs and the adult have 8 legs, and they swim vigorously. They are parasites in that they will cling on to the victims and suck the juices out of them without killing them, just getting their juices. The adults grab with their pedipalps and they pierce and inject digestive juices. They'll hang on to almost anything: flies, beetles, mosquitoes, larvae. They don't care much. Here you can see one that's rather frantically swimming around in circles. I know some of you say that this is your favorite insect. It lays its eggs in the water. The larvae are cute little guys. They're called wigglers, and they're only about a quarter inch long. And by now, I think you've probably already guessed what they are. It's the mosquito. Yes. They lay their eggs first. The larvae then molt 4 times in 7 to 14 days. Then they form a pupa. They go through complete metamorphosis and they emerge as adults. The larvae come to the surface to get air. So here's a picture of the egg mass floating in the water and subsequently the little wiggler, and then it forms a pupa. And you can see in this pupa the mosquito emerging, and then finally the adult mosquito. The wigglers crawl up to the surface where they put their tail up. They have what's called a siphon, and that sucks in their air. They grow in any fishless collection of water, bird baths, water fountains, old tires, watering cans. So it's important around your house not to have any of those things holding water, or you too can grow your own mosquitoes. So here I'm going to show you something of interest. This is a bunch of these in a bug box swimming around, and on top are a couple of the exuvia, the skin that they've crawled out of. And you can see why they're called wigglers. So what good are mosquitoes? Somebody asked me that earlier. In fact, that's probably the most common question I ever get from adults. Well, for one thing, they filter the bacteria, the wigglers do, and they eat algae. They're eaten by fish and aquatic insects. They convert dead material into usable nitrogen, and they're eaten by birds, bats, and spiders. Some of the adults are even pollinators, believe it or not. So I'm going to show you now what it looks like to be bitten by a mosquito. I was sitting on our porch deck when a mosquito landed on me, and I happened to have my macro camera open. So I got a series of photographs. And so the one on the left is just before it penetrated, and the one on the right is when it's had its fill. That red stuff in there is hemoglobin in the form of blood. So I thought you'd enjoy seeing that. The smallest animals that I found in the pond were Diphinia, water fleas. If you look carefully through the water, you won't even see them. You have to really get them up in a container where you can get your eyeball up next to them, and they are transparent. That's part of the problem, since they are so, you can see right through them. You can actually see their intestines move. You can see their heartbeat. They have a jerky motion they call water fleas because they have a jerky motion and they hop around like a flea. They swim by their antennas. Yeah, that's right. Their antennas actually row them along. And they eat algae and bacteria, very tiny things. You can see the eye on this one is in the right lower corner there, that little black spot. They have compound eyes, believe it or not. So this is what the anatomy of one looks like next to a picture of one. So you can see the antennas have feathery ends on them to help push the water, again, rowing action. They have a compound eye. Their heart is in the back. So that's that black spot on the right side on the back of the animal. They have legs, and they have the gut and the abdomen at the bottom. You can see that curving around. There's another smaller one below that animal. And you see the egg sac that they indicate there? Well, those eggs, they will have their eggs in their back. They don't have to mate. Sometimes they will mate, but many times they'll have it without mating. And they have their eggs that they keep in a brood sac on their back. They can hold those eggs for 1 day before the embryos come out, and then the embryos will live within them for 3 to 4 days before they release them. And so in a video I'm going to show you, you can actually see the embryos moving. The embryos go over 4 to 5 instars over a 10-day period. So here's what it looks like close up. I put 4 drops of water in a bug box and then filmed the guys swimming around in there. You can see the innards moving along there. Then I put a single one on a piece of paper. The water is absorbed by the paper and leaving the animal wiggling there where you can get a good view of it, and you can see all the things that we've been talking about. Here you can see the embryo wiggling in the back of the creatures. And when I tap the paper uh, to make it vibrate, the animal responds, as you can see. Two days later, I went out to the field after a rain. The ditches were now full, and that was much more like much wider. And there was a whole bunch of eggs in there. The eggs that you see at the bottom here are frog eggs. They're in a big clump. The strings of eggs are toad eggs. And so they're wiggling around. You can see the pointer there. Uh, they're floating around in the water. And what I saw once I picked them up, we put them in a bug box. The bug box is always around, and there they are. So I had Barb pick them up with a eyedropper, and they would wiggle around as she looked at them. And then I turned my attention to the right, and there was a snapping turtle under the water, just laying perfectly still. Now, I got the snapping turtle out. I used my stick to push it around. It didn't like it. It chewed several holes in the rubber tip of my hiking stick. But I finally got it out the water to where I could see it. And all of a sudden, it opened its mouth, and out came a large wad of eggs, toad eggs, frog eggs. It had been eating them all. Now it was emptying its mouth so it could bite my stick. So I guess the real message is there's all kinds of life, from tiny microscopic things all the way up to, in this case, a 12-inch long carapace. The turtle itself was 12 inches long with his head pulled in, and they were all living off this water that is ephemeral. That means it lasts a short time. So a few weeks from now, that may be all dry. There's no fish in it, and that's critical, because if fish lived in there, much of the things that we saw would be eaten up. So ephemeral ponds or ephemeral waters are very special places where frogs and toads can breed, and you have a whole food web right before your eyes. Pretty incredible. So now that's the end. You say goodbye to the life in the puddle here, and then it's time for you to go out and find your own adventure. Look in every little bit of water, and be sure and check out any bird bath you have around the house, because you don't want your favorite wolf insect, the mosquitoes, to be growing in your farm.